There is no darkness like the Persian Gulf at 0200 hours. No moon, no horizon. The water and the sky blend into a single black void. Radar becomes your eyes. Sonar becomes your ears. And if both fail, you're blind. At 0213 hours local time, a US Navy warship operating in the northern Strait of Hormuz detected a formation of contacts accelerating out of the darkness. No running lights, no transponders, no radio communication. Bearing directly at the ship at 48 knots. The officer on watch had less than 3 minutes to determine whether this was an Iranian fishing fleet returning late, or a coordinated nighttime assault against the most heavily trafficked choke point on Earth. He got the answer 90 seconds later, when the first tracer rounds lit up the darkness. 12 minutes after that, the Strait of Hormuz fell completely silent. No engines, no radio traffic, no gunfire. Just the sound of water lapping against wreckage. Welcome to Warfare Signal, where we break down the most critical military operations shaping global power. Night operations in the Strait of Hormuz are among the most dangerous assignments in the US Navy. The strait itself is only 21 miles wide. The navigable shipping channels are narrower still, roughly 2 miles in each direction, separated by a 2-mile buffer zone. Tankers, container ships, and military vessels all share these lanes. At any given time, dozens of vessels are transiting. Now compress that into darkness. Remove visual identification. Add the fact that Iranian territorial waters press within 12 nautical miles of the shipping lanes. And understand that the IRGCN has been rehearsing nighttime fast boat operations for over a decade. The ship at the center of this incident was the USS Nietzsche, an Arleigh Burke-class Flight II A-guided missile destroyer. Displacement, 9,700 tons. Crew of 329. Full Aegis combat suite. SPY-1D radar. 5-inch gun. Harpoon anti-ship missiles. Phalanx CIWS. ESSM point defense missiles. Torpedo tubes. Electronic warfare systems. One of the most capable surface combatants afloat. The Nietzsche was conducting a scheduled transit through the strait, eastbound, heading from the Persian Gulf into the Gulf of Oman. These transits happen regularly. They're planned, briefed, and supported by intelligence. The Navy doesn't sneak through the Strait of Hormuz. It transits openly, deliberately, and with full situational awareness, or so the doctrine says. At 0207 hours, the Nietzsche's AN/S PS-67 surface search radar was operating in enhanced surveillance mode, a setting that increases the system's sensitivity to small surface contacts at the cost of higher false alarm rates. In the Strait of Hormuz at night, this trade-off is standard. You'd rather chase ghosts than miss threats. The radar picture showed moderate traffic, 6 commercial vessels in the eastbound lane, 4 in the westbound, 2 contacts classified as DAOs operating near the Omani coastline. Nothing anomalous. At 0209, the electronic warfare team detected a brief burst of radar emissions from the Iranian coastline. Frequency: consistent with a Type 360 surface search radar, a Chinese-manufactured system known to be operated by Iranian coastal defense batteries. The bearing placed the source near Qeshm Island's southern tip. A coastal radar sweep. Routine. Iran tracks every warship that enters the strait. This was expected and logged without escalation. But what the electronic warfare team didn't detect was the second signal. A UHF burst transmission from the same bearing, lasting 1.3 seconds. Too short for the ship's signals intelligence system to decode in real time. Too brief to trigger an automatic alert. That burst, according to post-incident analysis by NSA cryptographers, was an execution order. It told a formation of IRGCN fast boats staged in a cove on Qeshm Island's southern coast to launch. At 0213, the first contacts appeared. 6 surface vessels, bearing 340. Range, 4.2 nautical miles. Speed, accelerating through 30 knots and climbing. The radar operator flagged them immediately. 6 contacts, high speed, No transponders, no running lights. This wasn't fishing traffic. Fishing boats don't run at 30 knots in the dark without lights. The officer of the deck, a lieutenant commander on her first Gulf deployment as OOD, escalated instantly. Captain to the bridge. Combat stations manned. At 0214, the contacts reached 40 knots. Course, direct intercept. At this closure rate, they would reach the Nitz's position in approximately 5 minutes. But the darkness complicated everything. Visual identification was impossible beyond 500 meters. The Nitz's electro-optical sensors, part of the ship's AN/SQQ-89 combat suite, could detect thermal signatures at greater range, but distinguishing a military fast boat from a large fishing dhow on infrared requires resolution that takes time. The thermal operator needed the contacts to close further before making a definitive classification. This is the IRGCN's advantage at night. In daylight, their boats are identified at 5 nautical miles. In darkness, that identification range compresses to under 2 miles. Those extra 3 miles of ambiguity by critical minutes of approach time. The captain arrived on the bridge at 0215. He assessed the radar picture in under 15 seconds. 6 contacts, high speed, intercept course, no identification. His first order, illuminate. The Nitz's SH-60B Seahawk helicopter, which had been secured on the flight deck for the transit, was ordered to launch, but night launch from a destroyer in the strait requires minimum 6 minutes of preparation. Rotor engagement, systems checks, deck clearance, launch authorization. The helicopter would not be airborne until 0221 at the earliest. 6 minutes he didn't have. His second order, radio warning on channel 16. Standard hostile approach language, transmitted at 0216. Unidentified vessels on intercept course. This is United States Navy warship. Alter course immediately, or you will be considered hostile. The response was silence, then static, then a fragment of communication in Farsi that the ship's embedded translator caught. Continue. Maintain speed. At 0217, the contacts split. 3 boats broke left, 3 broke right, classic pincer formation. They were at 2.1 nautical miles and closing at 45 knots. Less than 3 minutes to weapons range. The captain ordered the ship to general quarters. 329 sailors moved through darkened passageways to battle stations. Watertight doors sealed. The CIC went to full combat readiness. He now faced the specific nightmare of nighttime Gulf engagement. He could not visually confirm the targets were military. He could not positively identify weapons. His rules of engagement required hostile act or hostile intent before weapons release. High-speed approach in a pincer formation in the middle of the night was hostile intent by any reasonable interpretation. But the political consequences of firing on unidentified vessels in the Strait would be catastrophic if they turned out to be anything other than military. Declassified guidance from CENTCOM for Strait transits included a provision that would later be scrutinized. Commanders are authorized to use proportional force to defend their vessels against imminent attack. Positive identification is preferred, but not required when hostile intent is clearly demonstrated. Preferred, but not required. That phrase carried the weight of the next 90 seconds. At 0218, the thermal imaging operator made the call. Weapons visible on 3 contacts, heavy mount, forward position, consistent with KPV or DSHK configuration. That was enough. The captain ordered warning shots. The forward .50 caliber mount fired a burst of tracer rounds across the bow of the nearest contact. A boat approaching from the port side at 1,200 meters. The darkness erupted. 3 boats opened fire simultaneously. Muzzle flashes visible at 4 positions. Machine gun rounds, 14.5 millimeters and 12.7 millimeters, struck the water around the destroyer. Several impacted the hull. The sharp metallic ring of rounds hitting steel echoed through the bridge. At 0219, the captain gave the order that changed everything. Weapons free. All mounts. Engage. The Mark 45 5-inch gun fired first. The concussion shook the entire ship. A 70-pound high-explosive shell crossed the distance to the nearest boat in under 2 seconds. The detonation was visible as a white flash that briefly turned the dark water into a pool of light. The boat, its outline briefly silhouetted against the explosion, disintegrated. The Mark 38 chain gun engaged the second portside target, 25mm rounds at 180 per minute. Tracers arced through the darkness like burning lines drawn on black canvas. The target took hits along its entire length. Fire broke out. Then the fuel tank caught. A secondary explosion lifted the wreckage momentarily out of the water before it collapsed back into a burning slick. On the starboard side, 3 boats were closing fast. The .50 caliber mounts engaged, tracer fire reaching out into the blackness. One boat was hit and slowed, trailing smoke that was invisible against the night sky, but glowing on thermal imaging. At 0220, the Phalanx CIWS activated. The 20mm Vulcan cannon tracked a boat attempting a high-speed run along the starboard beam at 400 meters. 4,500 rounds per minute. The sound was not gunfire. It was a continuous roar. The stream of tracers looked solid, a glowing rod connecting the destroyer to its target. The boat was hit by dozens of rounds in under 3 seconds. It broke apart. But here's where the night almost turned. At 0221, the CIC reported a new radar contact, bearing 180, directly astern. Range, 1.8 nautical miles. Speed, 50 knots. A single fast boat approaching from behind the destroyer, where the aft weapons coverage was limited. This boat had not been part of the original 6. It had been running dark, at low speed, positioned behind the destroyer during the initial approach. While the 6 boats drew the ship's attention forward and to the beams, this 7th boat waited, then accelerated from behind. According to Naval War College analysis, this was a deliberate tactic. The trailer. One boat holds back, lets the swarm absorb the defensive fire, then makes a high-speed run at the stern, where weapons coverage is weakest. It's designed for one thing: a close-range torpedo or missile launch against the ship's most vulnerable quarter. The Nitz's aft .50 caliber mount was already engaged with a starboard target. The Phalanx was trained to port. The 5-inch gun couldn't traverse fast enough. For approximately 20 seconds, the 7th boat closed on the destroyer's stern with no weapon aimed at it. The helmsman saved the ship. Without waiting for orders, he threw the rudder hard to starboard, swinging the stern away from the approaching boat and opening a firing arc for the Mark 38, which had just finished engaging a portside target. The chain gun swung aft and fired. The first burst missed. The boat was maneuvering hard at 50 knots. The second burst connected. Rounds struck the bow. The third burst hit the engine. The boat's speed dropped from 50 knots to 0 in under 4 seconds. It drifted burning, engines destroyed. At 0223, the Seahawk finally launched from the flight deck. Its FLIR pod immediately scanned the engagement area. The thermal picture was clear: 5 burning debris fields, 1 disabled boat drifting, and 1 contact, the last of the original 6, fleeing north at maximum speed toward Iranian waters. The helicopter did not pursue. The boat was disengaging. The threat was over. At 0225, the captain ordered ceasefire. The Strait of Hormuz fell silent. 12 minutes, from first shots to silence. 7 Iranian fast attack boats engaged. 5 destroyed. 1 disabled. 1 escaped. The destroyer sustained 14 confirmed small arms impacts. Hull damage was superficial. The Arleigh Burke's steel construction absorbed machine gun rounds without structural compromise. 1 radar waveguide on the aft mast was damaged. 1 external communications antenna required replacement. 2 sailors were injured. 1 took shrapnel from a round that fragmented on the superstructure. Another was knocked down during the hard rudder maneuver and sustained a concussion. Both were treated aboard ship. But the aftermath of a nighttime engagement in the Strait of Hormuz carries consequences beyond the tactical. Commercial shipping traffic in both lanes came to a complete halt during and after the engagement. 18 vessels, tankers, container ships, bulk carriers, stopped or diverted upon hearing weapons fire and seeing explosions in the strait. Traffic didn't resume for over 4 hours. The economic cost of a 4-hour closure of the Strait of Hormuz was estimated by maritime analysts at approximately $320 million in delayed cargo and increased insurance premiums. The Pentagon briefed the incident as a defensive response to hostile Iranian naval forces that attacked a U.S. warship conducting lawful transit of the Strait of Hormuz. Footage from the ship's thermal cameras was released selectively, enough to confirm the Iranian boats fired first, not enough to show the full destruction. Iran called it a fabricated provocation. State media reported that the US Navy fired on fishing boats without warning. No mention of the machine gun fire that initiated the engagement. No mention of the pincer formation. No mention of the trailer boat. But the real debate happened in Washington. The seventh boat, the trailer, became the focal point of the after-action review. It had not been detected until it was 1.8 miles from the ship. In the chaos of a nighttime multi-axis engagement, it had exploited the exact defensive gap that Naval War College exercises had identified years earlier. The aft quarter of a destroyer engaged forward. The helmsman's instinctive rudder maneuver was credited with preventing a potential close-range attack on the ship's stern. But the review board noted, with what sources described as considerable discomfort, that the seventh boat's approach was consistent with a vessel carrying an anti-ship torpedo or a suicide explosive payload. Had it reached the stern at 50 knots without being engaged, the consequences could have been severe. Within 60 days, all Arleigh Burke-class destroyers transiting the Strait of Hormuz were assigned mandatory aft sector surveillance, either a towed array for acoustic detection, a dedicated aft lookout with thermal optics, or an overhead drone providing 360-degree coverage. The Nitsa completed its transit. The crew received combat action ribbons. The helmsman received a Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal for his actions at the helm. And the Strait of Hormuz resumed its usual rhythm. Oil flowing, ships transiting, warships watching. But every crew that transits the strait at night now briefs one additional scenario. The trailer, the one that waits, the one that comes from behind. The darkness in the Strait of Hormuz didn't get safer after that night. It got quieter. And in those waters, silence after midnight doesn't mean peace. It means someone is watching, calculating, waiting for the next window that opens in the dark. Stay vigilant, stay informed. I'll see you in the next one.